Hello, welcome to LeadTail TV. I'm your host, Bryan Kramer, keynote speaker, coach of coaches, and author of H to H. Today's guest is Kyle Akerman, an analytics consultant for the data-driven marketer. In this episode, we talk about what the biggest mistakes B2B marketers are making within Google Analytics. We also look ahead to the year 2025 and talk about what B2B Marketing Analytics looks like. Like, what is your dashboard going to look like, and how are we going to think about metrics in a different way? Finally, surprise, surprise, Kyle is also a radio DJ and an improv comedian. Find out how it helps him and could help you in your own company metrics. So let's get into it. Here's my interview with Kyle.
Kyle, I am so excited to be here with you right now. I can't wait to dig in. This whole world of analytics is so crazy. I mean, it's endless. It's mindless. We were just off camera talking. I mean, the amounts of, and by the way, if we use the word data on this while we're talking, I think there should be a bonus point system, right? We should actually win bonus points if we do. But when you talk about data and analytics and all the possibilities, it is endless. And what I want everybody here to know that's joined us here for this awesome interview is a little bit about your background. You have a degree in electrical engineering and spent 16 years in engineering roles at Motorola. So today you consult with marketing teams on web analytics, as I understand it. Tell us about your career journey a little bit.
So yeah, it was kind of interesting. My first job out of school was working at Motorola, so I was a hardware engineer. We were designing the hardware for mobile phones. I did that for about 16 years. Probably should have gone into software development instead of hardware, but that's another story. While I was in engineering, I started going to business school. That's where I got excited about marketing. And then when I had the opportunity to make a switch after whatever it was, 16 years, that's when I kind of reinvented myself, left the engineering world, and started doing marketing. And one of the things I was mentioning earlier, I was trying to disavow my past engineering background, but it kept kind of coming back, mostly from the analytical side of my brain. And so that's what led me to Google Analytics, and I mean, really just any analytics within the marketing world, but Google Analytics is the tool that's most prevalent, I think because it's free. So it seemed like an opportunity for me to kind of get my foot in the door in the analytics marketing world.
So what is it about Google Analytics or analytics in general that draws you in, that really fascinates you?
Well, I like the fact that we can measure almost everything in the digital space. Clicks and scrolls and, actions like downloading a PDF or watching a video or filling out a form or whatever it is. And we can really get a sense of how people are using our websites or our apps, however we're communicating with our potential customers. And I don't know, I think that's cool that before, you put up a billboard to get your message out, but how do you know how effective it is? Unless somebody calls that number that you put specifically on that billboard, you don't really know how well it's doing. So I think the fact that we can measure everything is pretty exciting to me.
It's funny. I have a degree in public relations, which is ironic because I ended up doing everything else in my career other than public relations. But I always used to laugh with my classmates because we thought, well, what are we going to do? Hand out PR coupons so that people could let us know that they actually read the story in the newspaper. There was no way for us to actually measure anything of what we did. So, it's funny that you mentioned that. And it's also really fascinating about what you do is that there's a whole psychology to it. And I saw on LinkedIn that you have a digital psychology specialist certification. Tell us about that and just the psychology behind how do you approach all of this?
Well, I mean, a huge part of how people use websites and apps, I mean, there's a huge behavioral psychology component, what draws them in, whether it's the messaging or the images or, how they just, where they are like in a sales funnel, but there's all kinds of psychological elements that play into it, from, things like pricing theory, all the way to, I don't know, loss aversion, and just, reasons why people purchase. There's ideas of fairness. People are irrational in the way that they buy things. And we have to, as marketers, we have to be aware of that, so that goes along with the numbers. The numbers aren't enough. You also need to give it context of this rational or irrational behavior, if you will.
That is so true, and the irrational behavior of what's out there, meaning when you're looking for things that are trends, how do you decide what a trend is?
Well, I mean, so for me, the idea of a trend is within the data itself, and so it starts with a question. Like I'm trying to answer some specific business question. So, for example, maybe an easy one is, what pages on my site do mobile visitors look at the most? Because it might be different than desktop. So I would start there with a specific business question, and then I'm looking at the data, and part of finding insights in the data is looking for some kind of a trend. So maybe these mobile visitors are looking at all my recent blog posts, but they don't look at my service pages or something like that. Or I look to see, did a specific thing increase or decrease? And then that just gives me a little more insight about people's user behavior. And then I can start digging into why is that thing happening? So I think the biggest thing to remember about analytics is it just tells you what happened. So it's kind of rear focused. It doesn't tell you why it happened or what's going to happen in the future. Now, you can, when you dive deep into like data science, people are measuring and running like predictive modeling. That's a whole other thing that's kind of outside the scope of what I do. But in general, we're using our brains to try to figure out why the things that happened did happen, and then what we can do to either get more of that if we like the current result, or what do we need to change if we want to see a different result.
Oh man, it's exciting that the way that I hear that, the way that lands on me is that it's always changing. Because as technology grows, there's never going to be a pattern that stays the same. Am I hearing that right?
Correct. I mean, there's a whole industry kind of around this, like the conversion optimization industry, which analytics is a component of that, but that is kind of we were talking about psychology earlier. That is a huge component of, the conversion optimization industry, is understanding that psychology and, mapping it to the analytics to try to figure out how to get people to do what you want them to do.
Tell me about a best practice, or maybe not a best practice, that led you to a key result or a key piece of data that really surprised you. It took you kind of off your chair a little bit. It hit you so sideways that you're like, oh my God, we just hit a gold mine. Or why is that so wrong? If we correct that, it would make a massive shift. What comes up for you when I say that?
I mean, a lot of times it's just, this is kind of a general answer, but it's not making assumptions. Like we need to, everything's a test, and everything on your website, so say you have a video above the fold on your homepage, because somebody, the CEO really wanted that video there, but is it distracting? Does anybody actually watch it? Does it help you get new leads, business? So we would test that to see, measure, does anybody watch it? Or create a segment for people that do watch it. Do they convert, say to the lead form more than people that don't watch the video? And if we find that the video is kind of ineffective, then we get rid of it. So I think just the idea of we can't trust our own assumptions. Like we need to be kind of emotionalists. Is that a word? we need to take our opinions and our emotion out of it because it's just data and it's testing. Where we get in trouble a lot is when we kind of go to some of these quote unquote best practices. I think one of the mistakes is people will see something that they think works on a competitor's site, and then they're like, oh, well, we have to have that. But they might have a different audience, even though they're in the same industry. You just can't blindly follow everyone else. So just the idea that everything should be a test, don't make assumptions, and verify your hypotheses. That'll help you stay out of big mistakes, I think.
So it's interesting that you talk about how best practices are something that work, and yet you don't always want to stick to best practices because that's not where the gold is going to be. If you stay with them 100% of the time, you won't discover the undiscoverable, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, there are things that are, best. I don't want to say throw out all best practices, but just don't blindly do them. Put them on your list of things to test. Now, I mean, there are certain best practices like, if a form, when you fill it out, or it won't let you fill it out because it's broken, well, you got to fix that. Like, just do it. Like, so I guess technically that falls under best practice, but, a lot of just following a list of, do these 20 things and, you'll increase your conversion rate. That's, maybe one of those things will work. So you can't just, you really got to, what it is you need to do a lot of research. I mean, before you do any kind of, if we're getting into like conversion optimization stuff, it's all about the research you do up front, because that'll tell you about your consumers. It'll tell you about behavior, what they're interested in, if your messaging needs to change. And the big part of that research is having qualitative and quantitative information. And so I focus on the quantitative stuff, but I realized I also needed to understand all the qualitative too, because you need both of those. It's kind of I didn't come up with this, but I like the analogy. It's like beer and tacos. They're better together. So yeah, get as much qualitative and quantitative information as you can, and you'll be a better marketer.
Can you give me a specific example of one thing that you found, whether it's a piece of data or a set of data that you came across that really made a difference? Can you give us an example of how that might work or how it did work?
Yeah, I mean a very simple one. So I partner with some content marketing agencies, and so they're creating a lot of great content for their clients. And they're a B2B company, so they're trying to get leads, fill out a form for quotes, that kind of thing. And we wanted to know if this content is helping, and are there particular pieces of content that will draw more people in, get them to fill out the form. So an easy thing we did was we looked at the top performing content pieces, and there was just by page views, and there was 3 that were, far and above all the rest of the content. They got, 3 times the number of page views. So what we did was we decided to put a big link to the lead form right on those pages. And when we did that, we started getting signups or requests for quotes from those pages directly, and we like doubled. I think we doubled the number of quotes just by adding the form to those 3 blog posts, because the theory behind that was those are basically your main highways, if you will, through your site. So put your best billboard right there, the billboard being, the link to the form. And it worked. So we increased and then they got more leads, and so that was a pretty straightforward one. But it started with a question and an answer. The question was, if we put a link to the form on the highest traffic pages, will that increase signups? And we didn't know the answer until we did it, and it worked. So that was
That's
one
awesome that's so cool when there's something that could be so simple and yet so powerful. And I suspect that happens a lot. Is that a good assumption?
It can, yeah, a lot. It's hard to quantify, but I like to start with the easy tests like that because they're usually easy to implement and they could have the biggest effect. So one of the things that people that do a lot of conversion testing, once they get a list of things that they want to test, they go in and prioritize which ones they think will have the biggest impact. And then that's part of the equation they use to decide what test to run first. But then on the flip side, there's things that we think will work, and we try it, and we get crickets. Like, there's no change, nothing. So, again, it goes back to the don't assume anything. Just kind of take your opinion out of it, because opinions are how we get really ugly, like home pages and things like that. And it's usually I think the term what is the term, HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion. That's the bad way to get things implemented. We love to, whenever possible, bring data to any kind of fight versus bringing an opinion, and not fight, but debate. So yeah, it usually can crush arguments if you have the data to back up your opinion or hypothesis.
That is so appropriate for not just websites, but also to life,
Yeah.
not making assumptions. So I'm also curious about what some of the biggest mistakes are that B2B marketers are making, especially perhaps even just with Google Analytics specifically, because that's a pretty big question if we just left out Google Analytics. So what do you think some of the bigger challenges or the bigger mistakes are that they're making?
I mean, I would say some of the biggest Google Analytics mistakes are just in the setup. So there's a couple main things. I was just looking at a site the other day, and they're double counting all of their page views. So their page views are inflated. So right away you've got inaccurate data. So things like that. Not setting up goals within Google Analytics. And that's key, especially if you want to measure. So if you have a form that people fill out to request a lead, a quote, you need to be measuring those things, especially because it can tell you the pages people were on before they got to that page, and that can be super useful. Also, which traffic sources helped drive the most leads. So not setting up goals, not using campaign tagging, especially if you send a lot of email. So the way Google Analytics works is out of the box, it can't track clicks from an email to your website. It just throws it in this traffic bucket called direct traffic. So if you're doing a lot of email and you rely on that for part of your marketing, and if you don't do this additional setup you need to in Google Analytics, you won't be able to tell what traffic is coming from email. And I see that one a lot. So usually when we get that fixed, that's a big one and a big eye opener for people. What else? Uh, and that email is part of doing campaign tracking. So if you're doing a lot of promotion on other, say, like social channels, maybe a lot of B2B companies use LinkedIn. So you can use campaign tracking to organize your data better within Google Analytics and then compare campaigns, especially if you're running the same campaign across multiple channels. So if you're running a campaign on LinkedIn, maybe on Facebook, and I don't know, some other social network, well, you could, if you set up the tagging correctly, you could measure which social network is working the best for that particular campaign. So
So
I think those are the ones that off the top of my head are the biggest mistakes or opportunities to fix.
those are great, and what's really great is that there's this base level of uh, of what needs to be done when you look at a project, which I think you just explained all of these little things that just need to be corrected. It's kind of like the first things first. Let's get everything functioning,
Right.
and then there's the advanced stuff, which we were talking about before, which might be identifying um, areas that can be corrected that you don't even know about. They're not the best practices. They're the stuff that stands
Right.
in different areas that you may not discover unless you know where to look, where to uncover it.
Right.
Now I'd love to take the conversation into the future and look
Yeah.
ahead
Yeah.
into what's going on with other digital experiences and how they're starting to shift away from websites with devices like Google Home and Amazon Echo. And so in those areas, how do you see analytics being effective?
It's going to be a little tricky, I think, especially with the voice, because I'm not sure off the top of my head how they're going to how Google or any of these third-party tools are going to try to track that because there's not a click. So somehow they have to associate that voice command uh, as if it were a click. Um, and I have not seen anything yet about how they're doing that, but I bet there's some really smart people working on that. So I think what it'll end up being is another tool, another third-party tool, whether it gets integrated into Google's platform or some other, I don't know, mixed panel or some other tool. Um, it'd just be another thing that we have to learn. But again, it goes back to just once you have a way to measure it, it's just going to go back to the same principles. I mean, I know this sounds kind of repetitive, but are we able to measure it? And then asking questions. You know, the I don't think you're so I don't have a home device, so I can't speak from usability perspective. Um, but I don't know if they run ads on them or not. But if they did, maybe you could say which ads are most effective, and then are they getting people to do a voice click? I know that's not a thing, but request whatever it is you want them to request. I mean, right now I see a lot of the voice stuff just very simple transactions, mostly in the B2C. Like, hey Google, buy me tickets for Star Wars, or book me reservations at, the top restaurant, or, order me a lift. But I don't know how it's playing out yet in the B2B space. I think it still could be along the lines of in B2B, maybe maybe I could download like a price page for a manufacturing machine that I need or something. Hey Siri, hey Google, I want to know the spec for the XK27, part for my manufacturing machine. Or I want to talk to somebody at Acme Printing. Can you schedule me an appointment? Like, now we're getting into something useful for the B2B, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really have I got to think about it a little more. It's going to be interesting, and I think whoever figures out the best way to measure it is going to make some money out of it.
It's certainly, I think, one of the things that I'm hearing, and I completely agree with, is how much still is yet to be done in that area.
Yeah.
Just to that point, I set up all my smart lights in my house on an app, and then I actually built it so that when I left the house, the lights would turn off. The problem is that my family was still home when I left the house. And so my wife called me and said, "Can you please come home because we need the lights turned back on?" We have a little bit of a ways to go before we're going to be there. I think is what I'm hearing, and actually what I'm feeling physically. So let's look into the year 2025 and talk about B2B marketing analytics. What does a dashboard look like?
Well, so there's many ways to do the dashboard. I think the most valuable for people, there's got to be some kind of attribution, because people are coming at these things from so many different touch points. And I think as marketers, we still struggle to know what's having the most impact, so, in 2025, is voice a part of that? And what component, what amount of the attribution should voice or paid ads or, organic search or heck, maybe even an event. I mean, B2B still relies heavily on live events, conferences, trade shows, things like that. So I think being able to include all of those in a dashboard and show the contribution from each will help us better know where to spend our money and our time. Because we have limited marketing budgets and we want to be able to put them towards the most effective channels. But yeah, I think something that definitely shows the attribution as accurately as possible is probably going to be a big part of it.
Attribution, baby. That should be a bumper sticker, I think. I couldn't agree more. So you attended Content Marketing World in 2019, one of my favorite conferences as well. Unfortunately, it wasn't the year that I went, so we missed each other, but I do love the conference. I love the people there. What was your most memorable moment or takeaway, the top takeaway from the conference?
I mean, so for me now, I've been going to that one. I've been going since year 2. So I've been to a lot of them. And early on, the conferences were all about learning for me, learning in the sessions. And now it's kind of flipped to where the biggest things that I get out of conferences, especially Content Marketing World, is the interactions with people. So whether it's speakers or other attendees. So while I still go to a lot of the talks, I'm kind of starting to skip some of them now and taking that time to, grab a coffee with someone that I meet in the hallway or that I, scheduled. I ran into him the day before. I said, hey, let's, tomorrow afternoon, let's meet up or let's grab a drink. I started something this year where, 2 years ago we had a dinner on one of the days. We went to one of the top-rated restaurants. There was like 4 of us that went to dinner, and that was great. And then this year I said, okay, on that first day of the conference or the first night before it officially started, I'm going to host a dinner. So I reached out to some people, there was 4 of us that went to dinner, the people that come in early, and it was great. Got to connect, really connect with people. And I know that's a big part of what you do. And that's super valuable because I don't get to see and be around most of the people at conferences, in a face-to-face capacity. It's very rare unless I'm, in their city visiting or something like that. So I think a valuable thing now is pick out people that are either friends of yours or people that maybe you could partner with to work on a project and try to meet them face to face and just start learning from each other. So that was probably the biggest thing for me this year, kind of a change in my mindset on how to go about a conference.
You're speaking my language. The whole human to human thing is where I live and
Yep.
what I
Yep.
love in life. And I'm glad to hear that that it still exists, and it's probably one of the strongest things that we can do at conferences is
Yep.
connecting with other people. Yes, absolutely.
And it gets
Great.
tricky at these bigger conferences because there's so many people um, that I think it can lose a little bit of the personal touch. So like we as individuals kind of have to be proactive and be like, okay, I'm gonna set up something. And it can be small. Like I said, we just had a small dinner, like 4 people, and um, it was perfect. So yeah, I'm totally with you on the human to human, and it's really important in B2B. I mean, and B2C too, but I think even more in B2B because you're dealing with these higher priced items that take a longer sales cycle. So you really need to build a relationship with, the individual that could be making the purchase. And there has to be a lot of trust there, and that doesn't come overnight. So a lot of it is just start planting these seeds of a relationship, and then you kind of water them as you go. Um, yeah, be a human, man.
You're speaking my language, like I said. So let's take a little walk around who Kyle is, and
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about you. Tell us about your interests outside of work. I understand you're a radio DJ as well as an improv comedian, which lights
Yeah.
my heart up.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started. So when I left Motorola, uh, well, to be perfectly frank, when they laid me off in 2010, um, I had some time on my hands. I had a very nice severance, so I, took a break because we rarely get that opportunity. And I was trying to figure out how to kind of get a foothold into marketing because I was making a huge switch from engineering to marketing. And I came across an opportunity. There's a community radio station in town. It's called Chirp Radio. So Chirp like a bird. It's an acronym, the Chicago Independent Radio Project, 107.1 FM. And the entire organization, it's a nonprofit, and the entire organization is volunteers. And so I was like, well, maybe I could help on their marketing team, build up some marketing experience, and that'll make it a little bit easier to, when I then go try to get a marketing job. So I went to one of their volunteer intake meetings, joined the organization, started doing I was doing like street teaming and helping out with their social media team. And then there was an opportunity to become a DJ because the thought that I had was to be a good marketer, I should really understand the product. And the main product was the music and the radio. So I got trained by the organization because I had no previous radio experience. And yeah, I started doing a 6 to 9 a.m. shift once a week on Monday mornings, which was really tough. But I did that for a long time. Now I'm on Wednesday evenings, just a 2-hour shift, so 6 to 8 p.m. And I've done close to 300 shows now, and it's a lot of fun. Like I get to play music for I should mention it's primarily a music station. So we play music that you don't hear really on commercial radio. So it's more for like the real music geeks, a lot of indie and alternative stuff. And But yeah, so I did that. So that actually led to the improv because for the first 6 months, I wasn't great on the air. So when I was on the mic, I was very timid and, stuttering and just not, I don't know, it just wasn't good. And so I was like, there was an auction I was at, like a silent auction, and they had an improv class at Comedy Sports. And I had this thought, well, what if I take that? That might help me on the air. So I bid for that. I won. I took a class at Comedy Sports, and I was like, I kind of like this improv thing. And for people that don't know, Comedy Sports is a lot like Whose Line Is It Anyway? Most people know that. So then I went on to, because Chicago's kind of the improv capital of the world. So I then signed up for classes at Second City. When that was done, then I went and took classes at a theater called the Annoyance Theater. It's those are two of the big three here in town. The other one is Improv Olympic, or IO. So yeah, that's how I got into doing improv, and I just take classes to build my skills. I don't actually perform. At the end of each of those courses, you had to do like a student show. That's pretty much the extent of my performing. But the improv has changed me immensely. So, I mean, I honestly wish I had learned these skills like 20 years ago. My career would be so different. But improv's great. I love it. I go see shows all the time. I have friends who are performers who are really good, and so I go support them. There's some great improv shows in Chicago. So if anybody's ever in town here and wants to see some comedy, just shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to tell you what some of those good shows are. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into that. We talked earlier about stand-up comedy. I've gone and watched a couple open mics. I have not taken the leap yet to go perform, but I have written down some notes. I've got an outline that I could turn into material. But that's something I think I'm going to do in 2020 is just there's so many open mics here in town, and I would like to just try it. Not as to become like a career or anything, but just for fun. It kind of scares me, and I think that's why I need to do it. I think you've said you've tried it before, so you know. Yeah. What else? A lot of local sports here. I'm a big baseball fan, so I follow the Chicago Cubs. Yeah, the football team, the Bears, I follow them, but they're not very good. Yeah, and I love music, and I'm getting more into cooking too. So if you've got any cooking tips for me, I'd be happy to learn about those later.
Unfortunately, I won't be your cooking leader here on this interview or in life. That's where I do love the art of watching. It's funny, but actually being a chef is not my best foot forward.
Yeah.
What I love about everything that you just said is how diverse and how wonderful your background is, and how all these things play together. And that's what we talk about in marketing, and I'm sure you say the same thing in marketing and in analytics, that everything and humans themselves are so multi-dimensional, and we have so many different flavors and so many different things that we create this thing where life is not flat, and neither is analytics, is kind of what I'm getting at. And so I love that. I love how you just brought that all together and showed the true dimensions of who Kyle is. So thank you so much. I'm going to finish out with one last question. If I were to come visit Chicago, and it was my first time,
Yep.
I've been to Chicago, but let's say it was my first time.
Yeah.
Tell me one site I can't miss and one food item I have to eat.
Yeah. So if you want like an authentic, Chicago food, I'm gonna steer away from the one that the media always portrays, and that's the deep dish pizza. That's not really a thing. So don't do that. I would say go have an Italian beef sandwich, because you can't really get that outside of Chicago. A lot of people confuse it with I'm blanking out, with the French roll. That's not the right thing, but an Italian beef sandwich is something that's very Chicago. It's in the same family as like a Philly cheesesteak, but obviously there's no cheese, and it's got completely different spices, but the meat and the bread are kind of the same. So I would say an Italian beef sandwich, and there's a lot of great places. Portillo's is a big one. Al's Beef and many others. And okay, so a site to definitely see. I mean, it's it's kind of a tourist trap, but it's still pretty cool. Is I was going to say the Sears Tower, because I've lived here my whole life. The Willis Tower is what it's officially called now. I can't break the habit. I'm not sure it's maybe the third tallest building in the world now. I don't know where it stands. But the cool thing they have is on the platform deck at the very top, they have things in the corner now where there's glass, clear glass that you can stand on. And I haven't done it yet, but you can stand over it. So you're basically standing over, there's nothing below it. And it would probably freak me out, but I know a lot of people that do it. And so that's one part of that experience. And then just being up that high on a clear summer day, you can see really, really far. So I would go with the Willis Tower. And then maybe a 1B to that is the Hancock Building. And I would go to I forget the name of the restaurant, but they have a restaurant and bar on the top floor. Just go there for a drink, and that's like one of the coolest places to have a drink in the city.
Well, it sounds like a lot of different places that we get to go. And next time I'm in Chicago, we're going to pick one of those, and I'm going to meet you there.
Yeah,
so that sounds great.
We'll take in an improv show. I'll take you to some of the best stuff in the world, improv-wise.
Brilliant. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for spending this time with us on Leadtail TV. We are so excited to dive into some of the things that you pointed out and get down this world of analytics and understand a little bit more around both the best practices and the not so best practices. And so thank you so much again for joining us here. And we look forward to hearing and watching and seeing all the cool things that you're doing in your own business.